Welcome to another episode of Cloud and Culture. I am Derek Harris from VMware.
And I'm Danielle Burrow from VMware.
This week, we're once again speaking with Sean Anderson of VMware Tanzu Labs, this time with colleague Felicia Schwartz on board as well. The topic is about why financial service organizations are prioritizing modernization and the business pressures and opportunities that are driving those changes. Of course, we also dive into some of the approaches they're using to do the actual work, including the SWIFT methodology to determine the right path forward for important applications.
This is the second in a series of podcasts we're doing around the app modernization process using SWIFT, along with best practices and patterns Tanzu Labs has established for different industry verticals. And while this episode focuses on financial services, there are lots of useful nuggets for organizations in every industry. So stick around. Felicia Schwartz, Sean Anderson, thank you both so much for joining us today. Sean, we wanted to go ahead and get started with just a brief recap of the SWIFT methodology that we were talking about with you a couple of episodes ago, discussing how Tanzu Labs approaches modernizing monoliths. And I think that'd be a good place to start.
Sure. Yeah, just as a quick recap, SWIFT is a methodology that we use and we actually created at VMware Tanzu Labs to really take a top-down approach of modernizing and creating complex distributed systems and complex software. And really what it's doing is taking an alert approach to really figure out how the system wants to behave, not from a technical perspective at first, but more from a business perspective. So understanding how the business flow or how the capabilities should evolve helps us find a target to be able to modernize to. And that's kind of the key in the process of this, to very rapidly figure out how the software wants to be or how the system wants to behave. And then we build a roadmap essentially to get from where you are today to where you want to be in the future.
Great, thank you. And the topic of today's conversation is going to focus on financial services and app modernization for companies in the financial services sector. But Felicia, perhaps it would be helpful to get a definition of what we mean by financial service.
Thanks, Danielle. Yes, we put a lot of things under the umbrella of financial services, but when you look into it, there's a lot of different verticals under that. It could be wealth management, where we all keep many of us keep our assets. There's investment banking, which is more on the institutional side. There's commercial banking, where companies do their lending. There's regular retail banking, when we go and make deposits in our checking and savings accounts. There's insurance companies, and even within insurance, there's so many different product lines there. Making payments, we all use credit cards, we use Zelle. There's different things. So financial services has many different tentacles to it. So we're going to be talking about many of these, but we're probably not going to cover every single angle of it. It is very vast.
And when we're talking about financial services and modernization, right? I mean, so I think a lot of, depending on the age of anyone listening, your experience with financial services might be quite a bit different, right? So I think, we're talking about modernize, we're probably talking about companies that have been around for decades, if not over a century in some cases, right? I'm curious, especially in the insurance industry, and in the banking, I'm curious, what is it that's driving financial services companies to modernize? And you can focus on a specific, chunk of that or segment of that. Maybe, obviously, we can't get into why every single slice of that that definition wants to modernize, but
so there's many reasons for it, but there's a lot of competition out there. Fintech, again, a very broad category that covers all of these industries. It's grown over the past few years. There's many, I mentioned Zelle earlier. You have Venmo is competing with Zelle. All of these startups are coming here and finding faster ways to do things, to allow transactions. And with COVID coming in, people want that experience. They weren't able to go to the banks to go in there and make deposits or withdrawals. They needed technology to allow them to do everything. So that made a rise in all of these technology companies to grow. There's a business need now, and COVID has allowed it. There was recent interviews with a lot of these financial services companies globally saying their real focus now is going to, we want a better customer experience. We have to be able to support our customers. Not that it wasn't always a focus, but a lot of the focus used to be on like satisfying regulatory. And the shift has changed from regulatory is still a concern, but customer satisfaction is front and center for most of these executives of where they need to go. So these financial technology startups are coming in there with sometimes competing, sometimes complementary products. So there's a need for these existing institutions to be able to provide the kind of quick turnaround in capabilities and product offerings that some of these companies, and we see so many commercials out there of saying like you could get insurance in 15 minutes. It's really hard to do that if you've got an existing application that's been around for 20 years that takes a long time to process, to find out like, are you a good candidate for this? Do you have a history for auto insurance, for instance? Do you have a history of a lot of accidents that's going to affect the rate? So there's a real need to modernize that to be able to give people what they're expecting today.
It almost seems like there's a lot of older financial services companies that are an inch deep and a mile wide. They do a lot of different things, but they don't focus on having any one of those core capabilities, rapid or quick or innovative, right? So even things like, money transfer, like Felicia said, with Venmo and Zelle and things like that, it wasn't part of the core capabilities because it didn't exist before technology enabled it. And so you've got some smaller companies that are doing best of breed approach. Like if you want to rapidly trade stocks, you could go to like a Robinhood or something like that. And the larger companies, even though they have stock trading platforms, they can't react that quickly. But on the other side, there's those smaller kind of niche players don't have the breadth of offerings that the bigger financial services companies can give you as well.
All right, I was going to ask too, how much of it is like new products, and how sometimes it seems like it's just a matter like the user experiences is really antiquated, and like you can tell the systems are just old and slow. I was just trying to get like a fishing license recently, and I could tell when the system was built, I think based on the amount of time it took to process everything. It's like, why there's no reason clicking this button should take like 2 minutes for something to process, right? But so I'm curious how much of it is like the systems are broken, how much of it is they need to build just new applications from scratch to stay competitive.
I think they need to offer new products, and in order to do that, there's still requirements. Like what's in place, a lot of it, especially when you talk regulatory, a lot of those needs from a regulatory and processing. If you make a trade, for instance, in your brokerage account, a lot of that is still needs to go through compliance and all the regulatory needs. So you can't get rid of all of that. You can't just say, okay, go buy and everything is blind past that. But there may be a need to say, I want to start trading in cryptocurrencies, right? Like, or the NFTs, that's the big thing now. So there is need for all of that, but you need to be able to incorporate new products. That's why Swift became so popular, and we're using it a lot with our customers now, because we need to take that existing world, but make it more flexible so that these new offerings that are coming in fast and furious nowadays can be incorporated into their existing environment and satisfy the regulatory needs at the same time offering customers what they're looking for.
Oh, yeah. And something this past year has taught many enterprises is that being able to produce a new product very quickly, is really important. So contactless payments, I imagine, is probably something that a lot of companies had to figure out a way to offer their customers. Are there any other use cases that you think kind of came out of the pandemic specifically?
There's some interesting things that we've seen with just, you mentioned contactless payments, but the way that we're looking at some of this, especially with Swift, is the capability is still the same. You're still doing payments and you're still doing money transfers and things like that, but people are finding more creative ways to do that. And then like as part of the pandemic, we want to find ways to, send money to our friends or pay for, goods from eBay or something like that rapidly. And the companies that are able to react quickly and not necessarily create a new application, but more of create a new way of satisfying that business capability is what's coming up. So in the case, like you said, contactless payments, right? It's still ultimately a payment, but you're maybe plugging in a different flavor of implementing that. And when you have a system that is well architected to allow for that, it makes it much easier, and it gives you, as a financial services company, a competitive advantage too, right? Because it's faster or less expensive, or you're out the door first with a new feature like that.
And I know we want to get into it, like the actual, the actual process of modernizing some of these, but I'm curious how much. I'm curious if also part of modernization is like partnering with companies. That seems like right. And I imagine I look at Apple, for example, and say, there's so much stuff you do just on your phone, right? Whether it's Apple Pay or transfer money or a wallet and all these different things. And it's like, I was thinking, like, if I'm at a bank, you have to interact or partner sometimes with these companies too that have newer systems and that are just built on a different technology stack or maybe different regulatory concerns, right? I mean, does that become an issue, like, not just rebuilding your own stuff, but actually having to partner with these companies that are operating on a different set of technologies and requirements?
So I have an interesting use case for something like that, I think when you look at some of the smaller startup type of financial services companies, that offer one very specific focus, they tend to need to partner, with the larger systems, like if you're doing stock trading or something like that. But there's an interesting approach to partnering that the larger services, the larger companies have. Like, we did something recently with a large bank that did a lot of currency conversion, right? You would transfer money from US to Europe and change from dollars to, pounds or euros, but also cryptocurrency, and the actual process of doing that exchange, that foreign exchange, is something that people are making money on, right? And there's a whole Forex kind of, subculture, I guess you could say, within a lot of these large financial services companies where, they have a rate that I'll exchange dollars for euros for this particular percentage. But when other people start to see those capabilities that are available as a partnering kind of system, what it does is it means that, well, now if our system allows for it, I could actually shop around and get the best rate for my customer for that money transfer. Or what some people are doing is saying, well, hey, I quote my customer, I'm doing a 0.5% for that money conversion, but under the covers, I'm going to go to a different partner, let them do the conversion for 0.3%, and then I'm making 0.2% on all of that just by doing that kind of shopping around. And those kind of interesting capabilities for partnering, you can see how it kind of goes both ways, but it's much harder to implement if you haven't really thought about how that system wants to behave, right? And organize things into that, that flavor of capability. But once you do that, it makes it much, much easier to essentially just swap things out, like plug and play capabilities. It's not that simple by any stretch, but it's way more simple than rewriting an entire system just to try to stay current.
And on top of that, with the partnering, there are some capabilities that if somebody else has created it, I mentioned regulatory, there's regulation tech, right? Where they're building a lot of these software to handle some of the regulatory components that financial services are subject to. So if they architect their applications properly, they could do that plug and play from a regulatory so that there's reporting done. They don't have to invest their people's time in building out those regulatory capabilities. So they could architect their application to say, go bring in the regulatory component outside. So there is a partnering aspect to it with these fintech companies that by taking, some of these very business critical applications, architecting it and decoupling it in the right way, you could partner where you can. You could build out the capabilities and the new products that customers are expecting from you, and find the right mix and match of that. One of the advantages our customers have is they've got customers that like them already. They're not looking to leave. They're looking for more capabilities. So by properly modernizing their systems to do what they're really good at, but to do it better and faster and allow the capabilities to grow faster, which is really the ask. Like they're seeing from their customers is, we like you, we like the partnership we have with you, but we want this product that this other, quick startup can do. Can you give that to us? So I think they're embracing that. We need to modernize soon so that we can retain and grow the customers as opposed to worrying about losing them.
I love that way of framing it, by the way, just because, I mean, for a lot of reasons, like, you haven't had a bad experience with your bank or whatever your situation is, like, why leave? And also, it's a pain. like it's a big thing. I mean, it's not data gravity. It's some sort of gravity that keeps you there. And right. It's just like, how about we move with us, evolve with us.
And these banks have experience. People like the fact that they've been there, done that. They, COVID, I mean, we all talk about COVID now, like, they were still around. Like, the big companies survived that. They didn't have to worry, like, I have all my money or my insurance or my investment someplace, and now this company went under. We've heard in the newspaper recently about some of these fintech companies that came in to do trading, and then they got shut down in the same day. And I'm trying to be intentionally vague about putting names in there, but if you've got a brand that's been around for a long time, especially, we've had in 2008, we had a financial crisis, things that survived that, they've got experience. And that's a comforting factor in uncertain times.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine that, the security and compliance elements of, these applications and these architectures are so critical to maintaining that customer trust and the integrity of those companies. I wonder how much this plays into, the larger challenge of modernization for fintech, for, financial services customers. Like, does security trump compliance, or does compliance trump security? What's really hard about it in this industry?
I would say one does not trump the other one, but they have to work in coordination. You need to build out business capabilities. You need to, when you do that, adhere to the regulatory requirements that are there. It's something that these institutions have been doing for a long time. They know there's continuous change for it, but architecting so that it's easier to incorporate these changes is really where they're going. And they're being forced to, because time and customer satisfaction is gaining in popularity, but they can't ignore the security and all of the requirements they have. I think it's becoming a little bit more obvious what they need to do. Like, the first time you do it, it's hard. Like, what do we need to do? But now it's becoming a little bit more obvious what you need to do as you're building these out. And again, when you take systems that are brittle and big and complex and you modernize them, it actually makes that easier to incorporate.
What's interesting on that too is when you think about it, things like security and compliance with every application in the financial services world, you have those requirements. You have to do that. And one of the ways that was solved in the past, you purposely had gates and blockers, to slow the process down so you could actually verify you're in compliance and verify that you're secure. And so it was purposely slowed down because that was the way of solving the problem. And part of what we do is often see that, security and compliance in the architecture world is really a first-class citizen. It's a capability that should not be an add-on to your existing capabilities, but something that is standalone, right? And once customers started seeing that going through this process, it made it much easier to say, hey, as laws change, or even as regions change, there's different compliancy issues in different countries and even different states, right? And it becomes much easier to automate that process to where it's not just, a bolt on to their existing system, or even worse, a purposeful blocker and review that keeps you behind the times.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we talk about DevSecOps all the time now. And I think that, but intuitive in there, or, kind of inherent in that is like, right, like it's just baked into like it can't become a blocker. It just has to become part of the system. And even at the infrastructure level, I mean, I would think was a while ago. We published a blog post a while ago. You can look it up. It was a platform architect or operator from TD Ameritrade, one of our customers, and he was like talking about having to manage Kubernetes clusters across the organization, and for compliance reasons, whatever. Like he's always having to update and make sure, and different teams are doing different versions, and it's just like, it feels like you're playing. It seems like if you're not automating this, if you're not baking it in, you end up playing whack-a-mole with trying to keep up with not just changing compliance regulations, but like what's going on inside your organization. Like, because not every team takes it as seriously or has the skill set as some more advanced ones. So
I was wondering too, like when we're talking about Swift and we're talking about going through, the whole process of figuring out how the system wants to behave, where do you find that when you're working with financial services systems, I don't know, maybe pick insurance or pick banking, are there certain places where you find patterns or trends where it really makes sense to kind of insert things that weren't there before to kind of help automate these formerly manual processes? Or what are some of the patterns around security and compliance that come up in these practices of re-architect?
From a pattern perspective, I think this is one of the benefits of having that kind of top-down approach, thinking about how the systems want to behave, because the more that we've been involved with, various types of financial services companies, you do start to see that, there's patterns that repeat themselves, even though everybody's their own little snowflake. It's things like compliance is always there. Like as an example, in the US, when you're applying for a loan of, or a credit card or something like that, there's requirements that didn't used to exist that do now, that you have to do an OFAC check to see if the applicant's on the terrorist watch list or something like that, or if they're, in a country that the U.S. has banned business with, something like that. But the solution to those becomes a similar pattern. So when we start to see something that, both insurance and, consumer lending has the concept of an application, and they have a concept of either decisioning, do I have enough information to say, yep, this person's approved for a loan, or underwriting, yes, they qualify for our product. Like all of those kind of patterns, you start to see flavors repeating themselves, which is kind of nice, because it means the solutions, you're at least partway there, that, hey, at this other customer, this worked well for that same core capability. And it helps validate that, that was a good direction to start going. Or you start to see that, we went through this rapid feedback loop, and you realize, well, maybe we didn't implement that the best way. So we should, make a change at the next opportunity. But those same patterns repeat themselves, both from a business capability and need standpoint, and the design of the system that evolves to model or to make that part of the system actually work.
And across, like in each of these industries, these sub industries in financial services, you're going to have basic concepts that'll be the same. That there's an account, right? Getting alignment on what an account means, just like we started with what a financial services mean. But everybody's going to have an account. Everybody's going to have a prospect of potential new accounts. They're going to have products. So there's a lot of commonality. It's how you treat it. Everybody's done their own thing, and so there are commonalities that make sense. So as we talk to more and more customers, we have a better understanding of, well, what should an account refer to? What is the ubiquitous language we could put around that? And that will translate from one customer within a specific industry to the next.
I'm wondering too, from technically, how much, we hear frequently, right? There are systems, a lot of mainframe systems in financial organizations that are still running, still mission critical. I'm curious how frequently you see companies actually and clients actually getting rid of those or rewriting those applications, or how much of it is how can we build an architect around the system that we cannot take down or we cannot get rid of for whatever reason?
Yeah, that's that's an interesting question because I think there's an assumption, or at least people position it, that mainframes are bad or monoliths are bad, and really it's, well, bad monoliths are bad, and using a mainframe for what it's not best suited for is a challenge. But what I've seen personally is situations where it's not necessarily a desire to get off the mainframe. It's more of we want to have an efficient application base, and the mainframe, the way that it's structured, is prohibiting us from getting there. So often what we'll do is, as we go through, and it's part of the reason why with Swift we don't look at the technology first, we look at the capabilities, and then we map that to say, the system wants to behave like this, what technology is best suited for that? And in a lot of cases it's, hey, the mainframe is rocking at the rate calculations for insurance or this particular component, but it's not very good at backing up, a web app on, or a mobile app on somebody's phone, right? And so what we'll do often is discover that unless there's a desire to say we want to get rid of the mainframe experience completely, what customers often do is they'll say, well, here's some core capabilities that totally make sense to run in the cloud now, and maybe the number crunching, for example, we'll just keep on the mainframe, or we'll even modernize that but have it more efficiently optimized for just the small capability it's used for. And so it doesn't always go away, but that's actually good because you're more effectively using it just like any other software system.
And oftentimes what we'll do is we could look at the mainframe system, but one of the benefits of Swift is we don't have to say we're taking the whole thing in one fell swoop, getting it off the mainframe. As Sean said, there are capabilities that maybe are not necessarily needed or not best use cases. I worked with one insurance company where they needed to get information from outside agencies. It was built in the mainframe back in whenever, 19 something. And the methodology was batch or faxes. Like they would automate faxes going, right. It was really old, and the agencies had APIs, but because they had built this on the mainframe, they needed to do something. Nobody really understood the system. So going through Swift, we were able to, and that was a time consuming. So when we talked earlier about the customer experience, the customer could not get a quote until this information came back, because it was a rating information that would help drive what the customer would actually have to pay. So taking that component, understanding as Sean refers to it as the North Star of where it needed to be, we could focus on breaking that one piece away from the mainframe, iterating on that in weeks, getting that piece automated, using the latest technology that the outside agencies had to drive the API, use their APIs instead of faxes. And it allowed quicker turnaround. So the bulk of the application still resided on the mainframe, but the capability was quickly put in place that really was a roadblock for the customers. And, the process within Swift of seeing the big picture, where it needs to go, where the pain points are, allows you to make those quick changes first. And in this one, our engagements with customers are usually with, say, approximately 3 months, 12 weeks. And within that time frame, we were able to build out that capability and see it working, even with this outside agency.
That's great. I think that might be the Travelers Insurance case study, which is actually a public reference, so it's okay to name drop. Yeah. And I'm wondering too about data and the challenges that you're facing when you're helping, modernize and approaching, the data gravity that comes along with these massive systems. And where do you even start?
To the cloud, right?
Yeah, just buy a product and it'll magically happen. Now, the data gravity problem is challenging, and it's also part of what we do with Swift is we're helping define an application as business logic plus the data for that particular capability. So often what happens when people try to modernize, the first thing they do is they'll say, let's create an API layer so we can isolate, or we could, break the new from the old and kind of insulate that change. but they never look at the data, just because, well, for one, it's kind of challenging, but there's no landing pad for it. There's no, North Star, like Felicia said. And so what we try to do is consider data as part of the application, or more importantly, part of the capability. So when you were talking about like a ratings engine, there's data that is associated with that capability. And then we think in terms of, well, that means the rating system or the rating capability should own that data. It should be responsible for it. And that at least gives the capability of being able to say, hey, as we're modernizing this application, it's not just the business logic, but we're able to start identifying chunks or pieces of that data monolith that should live in that new capability as well. And there's a lot of, challenging techniques to make that happen. But we found that once you have that capability defined, it actually makes it much easier to kind of break that data gravity, or at the very least understand where it lives and not make it worse by having new systems need to use the old data. They can start going through the new capability, new functionality, and eventually that data can also wither and die on the vine as you're modernizing as well. And that's powerful. And that's something that a lot of people really don't think about. If you're an application engineer, data is just that thing that happens. But if you're a data engineer, you're scared straight, because it's like, holy cow, there's a lot here and I don't even know where to begin. So same pattern, I guess, applies of understanding that capability.
And oftentimes, just like with the mainframe, the ask is, I need to get out of my current database. Let me move this, in its entirety someplace else. So we start bringing up these conversations, as Sean mentioned, about let's look at capabilities and how the data should be and how you're going to be using it.
Yeah, I was going to ask too. I mean, it seems like anytime we're talking about regulations and data, we talked about this on our previous podcast about data transformation as well. But as more data privacy laws come online that seem to limit how long you can store data, what kind of access, what kind of controls you have to have over data, deleting it, and customer requests and all this stuff. How does those things factor in? Because it's not just, at this point, it becomes not just where the data is stored, how it's accessed, but like the level of control to some degree that you have to have over the data and your ability to act on it, more quickly than you previously had to.
Yeah, you just pointed out one of the big problems of having kind of these monolithic data stores, right? As regulations change, you may be forced to handle data that doesn't need it in a certain way, right? Because you have a monolithic data store, for example, and it happens to have customer PII information in the same place where, non-sensitive data is, but now you have to apply those compliancy issues to everything because it's all or nothing. Right? And so by breaking things into those capabilities, it makes it much easier to adhere to compliancy changes by, capability. Customer data has different requirements than does, just information about a bank location or something like that. But when you do that, it also makes it easier to have the compliance for that data change based on the region you're in, or based on, different laws for different authorities. And that's always a huge challenge. But the other thing about data that people miss a lot is when the data is at rest, you think of it, it's in a database, and that makes sense. You encrypt it, or you have this kind of security around it. But a lot of these systems, even the older ones on mainframes, for example, there's a lot of data that's being passed around your system, through message queues, for example. And anything that is going through a message queue, when it's persisted, those compliancy issues are still something you have to look at. Is that message encrypted while it's, stored on disk or something like that? And those are really challenging to find, the same compliancy solution for 12 different ways of storing information. And so part of the pattern that we've learned is, as we're identifying that kind of data, if we're doing things like sending small messages around, we're only sending non-sensitive data, and then able to, secure and lock that down through those services, through the APIs, or through that, how that data has been organized. And it solves a lot of problems. It's still very challenging, but we've figured out ways to take a lot of that challenge out of it just by organizing things differently.
So I want to ask about one more, because this podcast is called Cloud and Culture, right? And I think we talked about I think we could cover what could basically be called the cloud part of it, more or less, cloud native part of it. But I'm curious on the cultural front, the one thing I recall hearing about financial services companies and organizations, so since I got into enterprise IT, is IT was very much a competitive thing back in the, like a competitive secret back in the day, and so I know there's still that in the algorithmic front and all sorts of some of those areas. But I'm curious, how the reaction is, or what do you see from clients, I guess, in financial services in particular, and maybe it's certain segments of financial services, like how willing they are, maybe if they come to us, they've already self-selected, but how willing they are to modernize, right? And how willing they are to kind of open up and talk about what they're doing and change. And I just, because it seems like, there are some industries, the cultural stuff probably is easier, the lower stakes, but this seems like one where it might seem higher stakes for individuals. So I'm just curious, what kind of challenges that might present.
So we do come from worlds where traditional project-based is oftentimes matrix, where people get assigned. So they're getting better. I think success, creates new success, right? And everybody wants to be a part of the success. So we've seen in major banks, like some of the big names that are common in the world, will start out with, this is how we do things. And we are sensitive to that. It's hard to change something that's been around with a large organization with thousands and thousands of people. But we do like to start small and show them value. I think that's part of what we try to do is we will show you the value that we've learned over the years of why changing it, going from project to product, having people understand smaller components. It makes sense, and we prove it to them. Once you see that success and you see the value, and our team, the labs team, likes to go in there and say, give us your biggest challenges. Give us the problems you haven't solved. Because if we could help them be successful in solving those things that they haven't had luck in other ways, there's more of an appetite to do it. So we listen. We try to ask for them to trust us in a short time frame. And then the problem we tend to have after that is, how do I scale this, right? We're working with them in a small team. Now, how do I make the changes culturally to make a team that owns a product or a piece of this application that we've now modernized so that they can continue to iterate on it? They ask us that. We try to help them that. It takes a little while, but overall, we can't dictate to them, you must do that, because that causes a challenge. No, we know better. But if we partner with them, try things out, make changes. I've worked in Wall Street for most of my career prior to coming here to Pivotal and now VMware, and it takes a while to make these changes. But we could take steps towards it, right? What's the best way? If I only have one person who has a specific skill set, I can't make teams where everybody needs that skill set. But maybe I can make most of the people on it. And designers tended to be, even today's date, one of those skill sets that you don't have enough designers for every team. So maybe we have a designer work with 3 teams, but maybe I have enough engineers that could be on that. So let's start getting there, and we don't have to flip a button from one to the other, but let's have a mission that we're all trying to get in that direction. Let's show the success and keep growing. And then I think it takes time, but you do get buy-in.
Yeah, it sounds like a big piece of that is kind of showing the art of the possible and taking small steps towards realizing it. Well, Felicia, Sean, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a really great conversation. I really enjoyed learning about financial services and app modernization. So thanks.
Thank you both.
Yep. Thanks for having us.